Hello, welcome to my channel, Another Bibliophile Reads. My name is Greg, and I am here to do Week 10 update for my 100 book challenge. I can't believe that I've been doing this channel for 10 weeks and I've gotten through 60 books. Now, if you are not familiar with this challenge, it is a challenge created by Ali over at Criminali. And this is a challenge where you have to read 100 books that you already own before you can buy a new book. Now, there are some exceptions to that book buying practice, but let's get down to the books that I actually read this week. The first was an audiobook, and that was The Quaker by Laim McIlvanney. I don't think I pronounced that correct. And this was a novel recommended by Ali over at his channel, Criminali. And I listened to this as an audiobook, and that is how I was able to get this book. Because when I buy my audiobooks, I buy them in bulk in October at a 24 at a time. So I already had pre-purchased a number of books before I took this 100 book challenge. Now, according to Audible, is if I do not use these credits within a year, I lose them. So I'm considering these books that I bought as books that I already own, but books that I have not selected. So that is how I got this book. Now, this Quaker is a crime novel set in the 60s in Glasgow, Scotland. There's a detective inspector who was brought over to look over other detectives' cases of a serial killer called the Quaker. The Quaker has killed 3 women, and this case has gone on for a long time, over a year, and it has not been solved. And the detective has been basically assigned the task of coming up with an excuse to close out the case and redistribute the detectives investigated to other units and other crimes. The only problem is things don't go to plan. And I'll leave it at that because it is a pretty good crime novel. I was able to pick out one of the solution to the crime where I immediately says, oh, that's not right. But that may just be me, or that may be the author just letting the reader have a little bit of a tidbit to keep it interesting. So I could highly recommend The Quaker. The second book that I read was Lee by Tito Purdue. And this is a reread for me. I originally read this in the 90s. And I really enjoyed it, or remembered really enjoying it from the 90s. And I reread it, and it's still a pretty good book. But this is the story of a 70-year-old man named Lee. He is a bum, but he has money. He has property he can sell, but he detests his money. But he loves to read, especially Greek literature. There is a scene when he goes into the library of what once was his hometown, and he tries to get a library card looking like a bum. And the librarian very disdainfully hands him over an application, and he fills out the application, hands it back. And he asks the librarian, can I take out a book now? And she says, no, we have to check your references. And Lee goes, I did not put any references down. And then she goes, well, you can't check out any books. And Lee basically goes ballistic on this librarian and says, you don't read anything. What have you read? Can you tell me who Achilles has killed? Now, Achilles is famous, of course, in Homer's The Odyssey, and he basically humiliates this librarian. There also is a scene where Lee murders someone, a young girl, for no reason at all. And then he's bragging to someone else about murders that he's committed in this town. And the other person kind of looks at him and goes, no one's been murdered in this town. So there's a question about whether Lee has imagined this murder or not. He also imagines his wife coming to visit him at night. And this is his dead wife. And he imagines her at different ages throughout her life, when she was young in her 20s or when she was much older. So Lee definitely has some mental issues. I like this book. It's fascinating, but not perfect. The next book that I finished was The Odyssey by Homer. I read this with the Eclectic Book Group hosted by Shelley Swearingen and David Wiley. And we have read the Iliad last month and the Odyssey this month. And there is some debate at the group about which of the two epic poems is the better, the Iliad or the Odyssey. Some people chose the Iliad. I chose the Odyssey. I think I chose the Odyssey because it's a much more cohesive storyline of one character, and you don't get that whole big chapter of Homeric ships. There's also a question about whether Odysseus is a good leader or a bad leader. By modern standards, I cannot say that he is a good leader, but it's some interesting subject matter, and well worth some discussions going back and forth about what is the quality of leadership. After that, I listened to another audiobook. This was Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders. This is a very interesting and unique novel. There's basically two sections to this novel. It is the story of Abraham Lincoln's son, Willie, who died when Lincoln was in office. And part of the story is told by historical clippings and writings from people who knew Lincoln at that time. And the author does not tell you directly anything about Lincoln. You can only gather Lincoln through these clips of contemporary writings. And I think there's some historical writings in there as well. But that's all you get. And what you get is a portrait of Lincoln as a man who was devastated by the death of his son. It's also very interesting that some of these contemporary reports do not match each other perfectly. There is a couple of people who wrote about the clear moon that you could see on the night that Willie died, and another person about how the moon was covered up in clouds. So that really points out that even though you're reading these historical documents, and why 3 people agree the moon was clear, one person said it wasn't. So how much can you trust these historical documents? And the second part, and it is interwoven, is Willie's son after he has died in an afterlife of the Bardo. Now, I did not particularly like this section as much as the other section, mostly because I thought that this whole afterlife piece was a bit contrived, but that just may be my own personal tastes. Also on the audiobook is that every different narrator in the storyline gets a different audiobook narrator. So all these clippings from the one section has more than 100 different sources and 100 different narrators. And some of these narrators are not professional narrators, but they're pretty good. George Saunders basically used his family to narrate some short clips. And there's a clip by his son, his daughter, his wife, and his father. And you could tell there was one section where the narrator goes, "That girl sounds really young." And yeah, it was probably his daughter narrating maybe 2 minutes worth of text. And she did a fine job for probably a teenage girl. And I can recommend Lincoln in the Bardo. It's just that the afterlife section just really did not captivate me as much as the historical parts. After that was another audiobook called Immobility by Brian Evenson. And this is a science fiction novel. It was originally an Audible original audiobook. I do believe now that it is available as a Kindle ebook and maybe even a print book. And this is the story in the future where there has been a great collapse and most of society has died off. The book does not specify exactly what this collapse is. It reads an awful lot like some sort of nuclear war or some sort of nuclear radiation, because all life outside these protected enclaves has died off. And if you go outside without a protective suit, you die. Now, a main character named Joseph has been awakened from hibernation after 30 years. So it's at least 30 years after this collapse. And the people who awakened him says, "We need you for a special mission. And that's why we have awakened you." Now, we put you in this suspended sleep because you have a disease that has paralyzed you from the waist down. And if you do not continue to take specific measures of medicine, this disease will creep up from your waist and into your chest and your brain and kill you. And these people call Joseph a fixer, and he's assigned a task to go to another enclave and steal an item that the first enclave says was stolen from them. And he is given two strange human-like beings called mules who are basically carrying him piggyback to this enclave because he's paralyzed from the waist down and cannot walk. And these characters are very odd. You know something is strange about them. And you basically learn that they know they are going to die on this mission carrying him because even though they are wearing protective suits, the radiation is going to kill them. Now, Joseph is not wearing a protective suit. He is immune to this radiation or this poison. And they keep having to inject medicine into his spine, and at one point use a bone saw on his spine to protect him from this disease creeping up from his legs. It is also very clear that Joseph heals remarkably quickly. At one point he is shot, and within a day he's basically gotten over that bullet wound. So there is something very odd going on there. And Joseph's mind is scrambled. He does not remember who he was. He has a very hard time recalling things. So something is going on with Joseph, and the reader will probably figure it out. I think it was an okay science fiction novel. It will never make a top 10 list, but it's worth your effort if you got a little bit of time. After that, I finished a buddy read with Alan at Big Hard Books and Classics, and this is my favorite book of last year. This is J.R. by William Gaddis, and this is a fascinating book. It won the National Book Award in 1975. It is a novel told in unattributed dialogue for about 90% of the time, and the reader has to work to understand what is going on. There is a point at the end of the book where the scene is in the hospital, and one character named Bast is sitting in the hospital, and there's another character named Duncan across from him, and Duncan is obsessed with reading newspapers and telling people about what he reads in the newspaper. And he reads out a short article that he reads in the paper, and it is about the death of someone. Now, a careful reader is going to understand that even though Duncan does not understand who the person who in the article who died is, it is clear to the reader that this is a character that has been described in this book. And unless you're reading carefully, you're going to miss that. And that is exactly how Gaddis writes. You have to pay attention. The characters are often talking about things, and they're talking about something else as well. So, a fabulous book. I can highly recommend it, but it does take effort and time and a lot of thought. The last book that I read was Mother Night by Kurt Vonnegut. Now, before I read the Kurt Vonnegut, I tried to read Celeste, the Gold Coast Virgin by Rosamund Marshall. This was a booktube spin choice. I got through 50 pages before I threw in the towel. I can say without doubt that this is a god-awful book. It is just so poorly written. The author is in love with the exclamation point. On the first page alone, I think I counted 9 or 10 exclamation points. It's just like, especially in dialogue, everyone's talking. Oh, that's so important! Exclamation point. And Celeste is definitely a virgin. She is the daughter of a bawdy house owner. And of course, the bawdy house owner does not want her daughter to know that her mother owns a bawdy house. So she is protecting her daughter, giving her private education, and sequestered from the rest of the world. But as Celeste becomes an 18-year-old, she wants to see the world, and her mother gives her a day job in the bawdy house, which she calls a restaurant. But she has to leave before the true customers come in. And one day, Celeste is going to the train station to pick up her mother, who was out of town for a few weeks. And there is a bit of an accident as she sees a rich man pull up in a fabulous carriage. And she goes, "Oh, what a fabulous carriage. Oh, what a handsome man." And the handsome man, Barton Strong, says, "Oh, what a gorgeous young lady." Yeah, poor Celeste has never seen a man before, so she's definitely a virgin. But her bawdy mother is not a virgin, of course. But the one thing this author did that I kind of liked was that the author was not condemning the mother for being a whore and owning a bawdy house. It was very neutral. There was a lot of respect for this woman for building the business. And this book was written in 1949, but it was just so bloody awfully. I got through 50 pages and said, no more, no more, no more. Or I should say, no more, exclamation point. Okay, so back to the book that I read, Kurt Vonnegut's Mother Night. And the reason I picked up this is that I listened to a live stream event with the Library of America discussing a documentary that was made about Kurt Vonnegut. And this is a documentary that was 30 years in the making. So the guy who made the documentary met Kurt Vonnegut in his mid-20s and only finished the documentary in his 60s. So it's a long time making this documentary. And I do want to watch that documentary. But after watching it, I just had to read the Kurt Vonnegut book. And I was on page 50 of Celeste, the Gold Coast Virgin. And there's no way Celeste can compare with Kurt Vonnegut. Now, this is one of Kurt Vonnegut's great novels, I think. It is the story of Campbell. His last name, John Campbell. Oh, what was it? Edward Campbell. And he was an American who went to live in Germany in the early 30s or 20s and grew up in the 30s. It starts off in the late 30s when Hitler is in power, and Campbell is a playwright writing in German with a German wife. And he's approached by American spy master saying, "We want you to spy for us on Germany and Hitler." And at first, Campbell doesn't want to do it, but he goes ahead and does it. And what Campbell does is become a radio broadcaster, broadcasting propaganda in English. And his broadcasts are actually coded with secret messages so the Allies know what is going on in Germany. Now, of course, Germany loses, and Campbell is declared a war criminal. And the U.S. government has to intervene and whisk him away. And they say, you can go live a life somewhere else. And Campbell decides to live in New York City. And actually, New York City is the choice that the U.S. government presented him with. But later, when he's close to 50, he is uncovered as this German traitor. And that's all I'm going to say about the plot. But there is some parts of this book that just ran chills up my spine. There is a part in chapter 38, that has so much relevance to today's society and what is going on. And this is basically that a bunch of white supremacists are hailing Campbell as a hero, and other people are claiming him as a traitor. And who does he go with? The world views him as a traitor, but inside he is not a traitor because he was working as a spy master for the U.S. government. And the U.S. government is not really forthright in coming up and claiming that he was working for them. He does meet up with his a spy master, says there are only 2 other people alive who know that you're working for the government. I am one of them. Another person is someone I cannot mention. And the 3rd person who knew about you was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who is now dead. So I could highly recommend Mother Night. Fabulous novel. So what am I going to be reading next? On Tuesday, I find out if I am going to be a judge in the Book 2 prize. So I am basically holding off almost everything until I know what's going on. There are 2 books that I will be reading, or I can tell you that I'm reading. One is for February Fantasy Stories. This was a event created by the Bookish Bryants, and I'm going to be reading 4 short fantasy novels. So the first week in February, I will be reading Fritz Leiber's Swords and Deviltry. And this is a short 250-page novel, so that's not really going to affect my Book 2 prizes. The second one I'm going to be reading is the book group with Miss Reads a Lot, Sandy. We are doing The Sea by Iris Murdoch for the whole month of February. So I have the whole month to get through about 500 pages of this. Now, I'm just showing you this copy. This is a library copy I picked up. I'm actually listening to the audio version of The Sea, narrated by the great Simon Vance. And Simon Vance is one of the all-time great audiobook narrators. So that is a rather lengthy Week 10 update. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.